Hi. Tonverk, or Tonverk, depending on where you're from, has quite a few firsts for Elektron. It's their first polyphonic multisampler. It's loaded up with different new effects types, and plenty of sequenceable bus and send tracks to put them on, 4 gigs of project RAM, and all controllable with Elektron's famous capability to modulate and automate pretty much any parameter you can imagine. It also features a built-in keyboard, making sequencing and playing chromatically easier, and beside the sampling inputs, it also has 2 additional pairs of outputs to route audio to external effects. And alternatively, you can use any of the 8 audio or 4 bus tracks to sequence external gear. In this video, I'll take a look at it in detail, how it compares to the competition and to Elektron's own other samplers, mainly the Digitakt II and Octatrack, and pros and cons compared to the competition overall. Before I start, a quick disclosure: Elektron sent me Tonverk. Other than that, no money changed hands, they have no say over the content of this video and don't get to see it before it's published. I'm not even sure they approve of the way I pronounce it. Okay, let's start with an overview. Externally, the first thing that's visually obvious is that we have a new form factor for the Elektron family. Size-wise, it's about 1/3 bigger than the Digitakt II, and this additional space allows for a few extra things. A full octave of chromatic keys that's separate from the trig keys, which makes this easy to play independently of selecting tracks, makes kits more accessible, and for melodic instruments is more familiar for people who play keys. This also means that when you're sequencing, say, drums, you can quickly see which steps are sequenced for each drum, and when sequencing notes or chords, especially with the new step edit mode, it's easy to see which notes are triggered on each step. These key buttons, by the way, are not velocity sensitive. The extra size also allows for 2 additional assignable 1/4 inch outputs on the back, as well as an SD card slot where projects and samples are stored. This doesn't come with an internal drive, it comes with a 64 gig card. In terms of features, one of the most significant differences in what it can do compared to any other Elektron sample-based device is that each of its 8 audio tracks are polyphonic. That means that once you've selected one of the 8 tracks, you can play chords on that specific track, and you've still got 7 other tracks to do whatever you want with, including putting entire kits on a single track. These are called subtracks. So all these 8 samples live on just this one first track, and you can assign multiple subtracks if you want. Now, subtracks are a bit more limited than full tracks, and we'll talk about that, but you no longer need to waste an entire audio track for just a single element of a drum kit. Another important first for Tonverk is that it supports creating and playing back multi-sampled based instruments with its new multiplayer machine. Up until now, Elektron samplers would only let you upload a single sample into memory, and you could transpose that sample, but as you transposed it up and down, in this case, the piano would no longer sound like a piano. It could sound like something cool, but no longer a piano. If you want to faithfully reproduce an instrument, you need to sample it across multiple keys in its range, and often multiple velocities have different timbres as well. Tonverk lets you automatically create those samples. So for example, I created a multisample of una corda from Native Instruments, and as you can hear, as I play it up and down the range, it sounds like a piano across the board. Now these keys aren't velocity sensitive, but I did sample a few velocity layers, so you can hear it doesn't just sound softer, the timbre changes as well. This, of course, is very useful if you play this with an external MIDI keyboard. Another advantage of multisampling is that you can take a monophonic instrument like C-shell here, multisample it, and play it polyphonically. I'll show you that in a bit. Moving on, also new for Tonverk is 4 GB of RAM. As you might imagine, sampling hundreds of notes across velocity and pitch ranges requires quite a few samples. This una corda multisample, I think, is about 300 megabytes. There's no free memory meter, so I can't say exactly how much of the 4 gigs of RAM is available for projects, but I've loaded multiple 3-digit megabyte multisamples and they seem to work fine. Each project, by the way, can load up to 1,000 samples in 8 banks of up to 128 samples per bank. You can put as many samples as you like on the SD card and load them into different projects. Projects this large, by the way, do take a while to load. So if I say go in and load the factory preset project, and I'm going to fast forward through this, not only will it take a while to load the project itself, but it also takes a while to load the samples. So initially, as you can hear here, not all the samples for this project have loaded up. So it can take a while to load up all the samples in a pattern and sample heavy project. The next thing that stands out about Tonverk is its effects buses and sends. Most Elektron devices have a reverb, delay, and chorus send, and then perhaps a few drive or distortion effects sprinkled out through the interface, and often a main mix compressor. Tonverk does things differently in a couple of interesting ways. First, the send effects have now been peeled off and they get their own independent tracks. And you can also swap out the effects to a certain degree. These are the options for the send tracks. There are more for the other tracks, we'll get to that in a bit, but these are the options for the sends. And then another important aspect of the send tracks is that you can now route them to an external output. So in this setup, I've got microcosm picking up audio from outputs C and D and then returning it back to inputs A and B. So if I wanted, I could send audio not just to the reverb or delay, but also to microcosm as an external effect. Finally, for the sends, they're also tracks, not just effects. The fact that they're tracks means that you can also sequence their parameters. So for example, lock decay times or frequency gain and so on, any other parameter. So these can be automated over time independently of whatever's going on the audio tracks, including different track lengths. Now, beside the 3 send effect tracks, we also get 4 bus or insert effect tracks. These get 2 effects slots each, and you can choose from a significantly longer list of effects. And again, since these are tracks, you can sequence them. Effects, by the way, have modulation, 2 LFOs, both on the bus and on the send tracks. And bus or insert effect tracks can also be sequenced. Just an example of what's possible with sequencing of these tracks. On this pattern, for example, I've got track 2 sending audio to bus 1 with an automated distortion, but the track length of bus 1 is only 14 steps. So that distortion gets triggered polymetrically at different intervals to make the pattern more interesting and evolve over time. So for example, in this case, I've parameter locked a bit of bit crushing every now and then across this pattern, triggered polymetrically relative to the main pattern. You can manage audio routing from the tracks to the buses or the outputs on each individual track if you want, or on the main routing page. You can change routings using the encoders or just press a track and choose the destination you want to send it to using the trig keys, as well as these 2 keys for outputs CD or EF, which is the headphones. Now, that's not all as far as effects go. Each individual track also gets 2 effects slots, and the main mix bus also gets an effect slot, which you probably might want to have the compressor on. So to summarize the effects situation, 2 effects per track on the audio tracks, 2 effects per track on the bus tracks, 1 for each of the sends and the main mix tracks, all automatable. Audio can be routed to the bus tracks as insert effects or sent to the send tracks, so you can choose how much you send, and that applies to the bus tracks as well. So you can send audio from the bus tracks to the send tracks. Okay, let's continue with this, what's going to be a very long overview, and talk about I/O. Tonverk has 3 separately addressable audio outputs, A, B, C, D, and EF for the headphones, all 1/4 inch, as well as the inputs. The inputs and A, B, and C, D are all balanced. You can route audio anywhere you want as far as the outputs go. including the headphone outputs, which are separately addressable as E and F. However, by default, the headphones also get the main mix audio, unless you choose to turn down the main mix, and then they're just addressable separately any way you want. You can use the inputs to route in external audio and apply effects to that, or to sample or multisample onto the SD card. And if you like, you can choose to address these inputs either as a stereo input or as two mono instruments and just pan them center or wherever you want. And you've got the usual suspect routing options for these inputs, including the tracks, by the way. So you could send audio from the inputs into the tracks. Then you've got MIDI in, out, and through the SD card slot, which we spoke about earlier. And finally, and interestingly, we've got two USB-C slots. One needs to be used at all times for power, and it comes with a cable with this handy screw so it doesn't get pulled out easily. And then the other USB-C jack can be used for MIDI, for stereo audio in and out, and in drive mode to transfer files onto the SD card. USB input and output isn't multi-track, at least not as of the current firmware. And as far as my testing goes, it works with USB hosts like a computer or iPhone, and not with USB devices like this one or this one, for example, which would have been cool. So USB devices like Seashell, the Roland Compacts, and even audio interfaces all know how to send audio over USB-C, but at least as of the current firmware, we can't talk to Tonverk with them over USB-C, which would have been cool because we could have then used, say, an external audio interface to expand it with additional analog inputs. That said, the USB-C does work with a computer or phone, so you can use this, for example, to multi-sample a plugin you've got on your computer and take it to go. That's exactly how I multi-sampled una corda, by the way. Just hooked this up via USB to my computer. Tonverk sent MIDI out and the plugin sent audio back all over USB-C. Moving on with the overview, let's take a brief look at what we haven't looked at so far on the panel. Like other Elektron devices, you use function to access the functions that are labeled underneath the different keys. When no other modes are active, the buttons on the bottom are used to select tracks. You can see the track type here and track number. For subtracks or kit tracks, these are used to select the different sounds in a kit. But these buttons also have additional modes. You can see the mode they're in, by the way, with this little icon. So for example, they've got a velocity mode where they'll trigger different velocities of the active sound. You can also use these keys to select patterns or banks and then patterns. In mute mode, you guessed it, you can use them to mute tracks and subtracks. So if we say select this track, and these are its subtracks, and we can mute the different drums. In grid recording modes, they're used to sequence steps, as well as in step edit mode. As I showed you earlier, you can use them to route tracks to different destinations. In page mode, you can use them to select different track lengths. Once you've selected a track, and you can select tracks silently, by the way, by pressing this button. Anyway, once you've selected a track, you can tab between various tabs or parameter pages, and often you'll get multiple subpages within a page, which you can also toggle through by pressing the main page button repeatedly. You can access additional setup parameters by holding function. So for example, like other Elektron devices, each track can hold multiple types of machines. On the first 8 audio tracks, you can load either a single sample player, a multiplayer, subtracks, which are drum kits, or use that track as a MIDI sequencer, but you can also use the bus tracks as MIDI sequencers. If you do load up a MIDI machine onto one of the insert or bus tracks, you'll use the same track to both sequence MIDI notes and MIDI CCs, as well as the effects parameters. So if I load up an effect into here, I can sequence either the effect or the MIDI CCs, or actually both on the modulation page. So you'll see among the destination both effects parameters and MIDI CCs for the two LFOs. Once you've created a sound or a kit, a sound is a combination of whatever samples being played and any other filtering or effects applied to that sample. You can save that as a preset, and then you've got quick access to presets by pressing this button, either kits, keys or melodic samples or both. All in one long list. Currently, hopefully they'll add search and filtering. Continuing the overview, we've got a transpose button for the keyboard, an arpeggiator, which comes in handy. Arpeggiators, by the way, are per track. We've got a chord mode, which we'll talk about. You can chain patterns or create songs. Each project can hold up to 128 patterns, 16 patterns in 8 banks of patterns, and you can create 16 songs per project. And then to complete the overview of the panel, as you may have noticed, we no longer have page LEDs, and that's because patterns can be up to 16 pages long. So they had a choice of either putting 16 LEDs here or moving the LEDs onto the display. So for example, this pattern has 4 bars. You can still page through them by pressing the page button, holding page, and pressing the page, or using the arrows. And of course, I can increase the number of pages in the pattern. So these can get quite long. One last interesting thing about pages, let's just get this back to 64. Patterns can now run not only at the different speeds we're used to from Elektron devices, but also at all kinds of other interesting meters. And one last workflow tip about how you can control a specific parameter. You fine-tune it using these knobs. You press and turn for larger increments and function and turn for even larger increments. Okay, so that's it for the very long overview. Let's dive in and take a look at a bit of the details. Let's start with the single sample or single player machines. As you can see, we're asked to rotate encoder D to choose a sample. These are the samples that I have in this project, but I could always go to an empty slot and load up a sample from the SD card. There's quite a bit of factory content to explore here. Let's go for tonal because we're using a single sample, and yeah, there's a lot in here. As per usual, you can preview a sample with function and yes. Let's go with this one. So this is our single sample. We can play it chromatically. We can make it loop if we want, forwards or backwards, and choose appropriate loop points. And there's a crossfade here, so we can get a very smooth loop if we want. We can play this polyphonically, of course. Looping and the sample can be reversed, which is a really cool effect. And if the sample isn't pitched properly, we can also tune it. And of course, we've got all the other sound design controls. So we could filter it with resonance. There's a filter envelope, add drive, or release in this case. Add any one of 2 effects into the effects slots. And modulate either the sound parameters or the effects. So we've got 2 LFOs for the voice, for the sound, and then a mod envelope, which also goes to the sounds parameters. And then on top of that, 2 effects LFOs. All that per track. If I wanted to create a single sample, sampling is really easy either through the analog inputs or over USB. So to keep this legal, I'm going to sample my own channel. Let's go into the regular recorder. You can resample the audio from Tonverk, but in this case, I just want to go into the stereo input and USB. You can see there's a bit of noise coming in here from microcosm, so I'll make sure to set the threshold high. So this is one of my videos, and you could sample this right away with function yes, or just say hit pause and hit yes to arm sampling. play and start recording this. And then yes to stop. I can preview the sample and even zoom in and chop it here if I wanted to wherever I want to start. Anyway, let's just go with this, save it. It's always good to name samples. Do I want to assign it to a track? Yes, I do, thank you. And that is now our sample. So that's the single sample player. Remember, this doesn't transpose very well as an instrument, at least not up. It's cool transposing down. Anyway, if you wanted to make a proper replica of a plugin or an external instrument, we'd need to multi-sample it. So let's say that I wanted to sample Seashell here. Let's maybe set up a MIDI machine on a bus track just to make sure things are working as they should. Now I'm on track 9 here, but I'm still playing the sample. That's because by default, bus tracks are an overlay on the regular tracks. To make the keyboard active for the bus tracks, I need to hold track and press this. You can see it's no longer an overlay like previously, but rather it has now become the main track. So I can now explore the sound on Seashell and design it any way I like. I could, by the way, also choose to apply effects to it because it's being routed through Microcosm, but let's not do that for now. Anyway, once I'm happy with my sound, I'll go into not the regular recorder, but rather the auto sampler, which will send MIDI to an external instrument and record its audio. I can choose the input, that's okay, the MIDI channel. I could set latency and release times manually, or just hit yes to have it do it automatically. I can choose the note range that I want to sample and sample every, in this case, 3 semitones, which is good enough. Had I been sampling an acoustic instrument plugin, I would have added more velocity layers, which as you can see, you can add quite a lot, but that will generate a lot of samples. In this case, this patch isn't velocity sensitive, so 1 velocity layer is enough. You can see I'll get 29 samples. I can go to the next page. Choose the note length. This is a short pluck, so holding it for a second is enough for me, but I could hold the note to sustain longer. Say if it was, a mellotron or even a piano, I'd hold it longer. That would increase the sample time, by the way, and the estimated size. Let's just settle for 1 second for now. Hit yes, and it will start auto sampling Seashell. If I were creating more samples, this would be a good time to get coffee. I'm going to fast forward through this. Recording is done. It gave it a temporary name, Trustworthy Wayside. We'll need to remember this because you can't rename multi-samples as of this firmware. I know they're going to add that though. Anyway, let's just exit this and I'm going to unplug Seashell. So we're no longer hearing the synth. I'll go into an empty track, assign the machine to multiplayer. There are a bunch of multi-samples in the factory content, which you can preview. But we're going to go through these quickly and go to my multi-samples here at the end. Remember Trustworthy Wayside. Let's load this up. And we've got our Seashell. Now, unfortunately, there's no way to edit the actual sample. So say if there's latency, or if I just wanted to trim the sample. So for example, here, I think in this specific sample, there's a bit of a delay compared to these. Yeah, just in this one. Anyway, there's no way to edit that currently, so they certainly need to add that. I don't know if this latency is Tonverk's fault or Seashell's fault, but at this time my only options are to either avoid this note, yeah, the others seem fine, or go through the whole resampling process, hoping that it won't happen again. But potentially, beta bugs aside, I now have a multi-sampled Seashell, which I could also play polyphonically. And of course, apply any filtering or effects to. By the way, while we can't trim the sample, you can add vibrato to it. Control its speed and have it fade in. on my wish list beside trimming the sample would be great to be able to add looping points, of course, here with crossfades. And you can't currently import multi-sample files like SFZ or other formats, but I did have a look at the file format and it seems to be a simple text format. So if they don't add multi-sample import, hopefully that's something Convert with Mos can support in the future. Okay, let's move on to the next machine type, and that's subtracks. Let's load one up. Subtrack machine. Once you load it up, it'll give you a few factory sample sets to choose from. Note that these are groups of 8 samples, standalone, meaning just the samples, not a full preset. Or if you like, by the way, you can just load up a completely empty kit. Now note, these kits are just samples without any sound design options. If you want samples including sound design, that's in the presets. So let's say load this one. These are the different samples in this kit. Notice they're all on one track, on track 4 in this case. But all the sound design options are the same for all of them. So no sends, no effects. Whereas had I gone in and loaded a drum kit, then anything could go there. There's no preview here, by the way, for some reason. Let's just go with this 12-bit kit. So here, for example, we've got a few effects loaded up, and you can see the filtering is different per subtrack. So the beauty of subtracks is that we indeed do get 8 samples per single track. We still have our other tracks with their multi-samples or regular samples all going on at the same time. But there are some trade-offs. So for example, when you're designing subtrack sounds, you don't get, as you can see here compared to our loop, you don't get crossfades. You can still create a loop within a sample. And so there are all kinds of cool effects you can have here, but no crossfades, so you'll get a bit of clicking. By the way, to change the sample here, as you can see, we no longer have the sample menu, just hit function and the subtrack. Anyway, so no crossfades is one compromise we make with subtracks. We get full filtering and amp envelopes, as far as I saw, including the morphing filter modes. And each subtrack also gets 2 LFOs and a mod envelope. So that makes 18 LFOs and 18 envelopes per subtrack. Clearly someone at Elektron's supply chain got a good deal on LFOs and envelopes. So that's all the good stuff, but then probably the biggest limitation of subtracks is that the 3 sends and 2 effects are all global for all 8 sounds. So say if I wanted to apply a chorus or a reverb, that would apply to all of the elements of the track at the same time. You can't bypass a subtrack. You can't have different values per element, different send values per element in a subtrack, but you also can't even bypass any one of the send effects, which would have been useful. Same goes for the 2 effects slots. So in this case, the compressor may be applicable, but say the bit reduction, that's applied to all 8 subtracks. You can't bypass the 2 effects either. Now there's one sort of workaround for this, which gives us an opportunity to learn about the supertrack as well. So each subtrack machine or track also has a supertrack for the automation of all its global parameters. Let me show you this in a simple example. Let's say take our kick and put it here, and our snare and put it here. So since, for example, the filter is a per subtrack parameter, I could automate that just for the snare. Let's say close the filter on this step. So this is our pattern now. Maybe not as aggressively. So if I added hi-hats, say, to this pattern, you'll hear that the hi-hat on this step isn't filtered. However, if I were to automate any one of the global parameters, say the effects parameters in this case, this automation is done on the supertrack. Now you don't need to worry about supertracks if you're automating parameters live. Just hit record and move the knob, and the automation will be recorded. But what if I really wanted a reverb on this step? To edit the supertrack, just hold track and press the track button. You'll notice these 3 white rectangles above the track number. So typically when we're editing a subtrack, you'll see the subtrack number over here with 1 rectangle, but hitting track, and the main track will enter the supertrack, which lets us parameter lock global track parameters like reverb. So go to this step and increase the reverb on it, and we now have a massive reverb on this step. Okay, let's take a deeper look into the next thing that differentiates Tonverk in the Elektron landscape, and that's the number and diversity of its effects. A quick word, not all the effects are available on all track types. Here are the effects per track type: audio, bus, send, and master. And one quick word before I start, all these tracks have the same sample, just different settings for, in this case, the chrono pitch effect. And the way I got to these is with the cool randomization option here. So you can reset an effect's parameters just by pressing effects and clear. So everything is calm now. But if we hit effects and yes, it'll randomize everything. And yeah, just be ready to save something you like if you encounter it. So this is the first effect, it's chrono pitch. This will let you pitch the sound, and we can swap between dry and wet to hear the effect. And there are a bunch of parameters which we won't go through. Let's take a listen to the comb filter. And we've got reverb, delay, and chorus here, so let's turn that off. So we hear just the effect. So that's the comb filter. Then there's a compressor. I won't go over the compressor parameters. I'll just say that there's no side chain on the compressor when it's on all the tracks except on the mix track, the main mix track. I think that's something they need to add, especially for the buses. Let's move on, take a listen to the degrader. So this has bit reduction, drive, sample rate reduction, drops, and freeze, which is more relevant when a pattern is playing. So this is our pattern, and if I choose the drum tracks, that's a freeze on the drums. And there's a ring mod 2 here. Let's add that. Okay, let's undo that. And then maybe on the melodic pattern, this second parameter changes the freeze timing. Pretty cool. This is drop, by the way. Okay, let's go back to our flute and choose Dirt Shaper. So that's nice. Filter bank. Relatively simple. 8 bandpass filters. If you want more bass, less highs, or vice versa. Moving on, infinite flanger. Low pass filter. Pretty simple. Don't think there's a spread here, stereo spread, which is cool. Though there's a stereo spread on the regular filter on the second page as well. So I think this filter, you'd probably want to use it when you're putting it on a bus, say to filter out a bunch of tracks, because there's no control all here. So that's the low pass filter. Then there's a panoramic chorus. Maybe we could use some more character here. Pretty simple, I think. Anyway, moving on, phase 98. So that's a phaser, a saturator delay. Let's turn it up. This is the standard Elektron delay. Stereo width with ping pong. Feedback and time controls. By the way, tempo sync on these devices isn't a switch you turn on or off. You can just hold function to go between various tempo synced delay times. So that's the last track effect. There are a few effects that we get on buses. So for buses, we've got the super void reverb and warble. So let's listen to our super void. Frequency controls. Appropriately named reverb. Let's take a listen to warble. So warble will warble our sound. And we can apply filtering to it. And then there's noise, which happens regardless of anything. So it's a kind of lo-fi effect you can have running in the background. And then for our sends, remember we've got sends both from the bus and from the track. The options for the sends I think are all identical. So we've not heard the daisy delay yet. Remember this delay is on the first send track. So now, since I'm sending audio from the bus, I'll need to hit the send to the daisy delay from over here to hear it. The daisy delay gives you more control over how the pings and pongs of the delay skew rhythmically from left to right. And we haven't heard rumsklang reverb. Control of lows and highs. Size goes into space. Wow, nice. So those are the effects, unless of course you count external effects. So in this case I've got microcosm here, and I'll send audio to it. Its mix is down, so I need to increase that as well. So this is audio not sent to microcosm. We hear its trails. And audio with microcosm. I'm running the MIDI output of Tonverk to it, keep its clock in sync. So it's lovely to be able to add external effects here too. Okay, moving on, let's briefly take a look at Tonverk sequencing. In many ways, it's similar to other Elektron sequencers, but we do get a few upgrades here. I won't go into the stuff you may already be familiar with. Generally speaking, you can record live into a pattern, either unquantized or quantized, and you can play live into a pattern, either using the internal keyboard or using an external keyboard via MIDI. There's a quick shortcut to activate the metronome if you're playing live. If you make a mistake while recording unquantized, you can always quantize the pattern. There's undo and redo, which weren't active as of the firmware that I got. And like I showed you earlier, when in live recording mode, you can also automate parameters into the sequence by moving their knobs. Things get more interesting with step sequencing because we now have this step edit function and the dual keyboard and step or grid sequencer. So let's say if this is our sound, like I showed you earlier, if you press step edit and this is our sound, you simply choose a step, add notes to it, choose a different step, add different notes to it, and easily sequence that way. It's really nice that as you transpose through the octaves, you'll see hints of where steps are in the pattern. Hopefully you can see this with the lighting. So these hints will be shown as dimmer LEDs on notes that are active in the step. And same goes here in the octaves. Octaves that have active notes will be lit up dimmer. So let's say add a note here, and a note here on this step. Again, hopefully you see this on camera. All 3 octaves are lit up to show us there are notes on those octaves. There's full micro timing support here. So for example, for this chord, I could move notes left and right. Now notice when I press the step, I'm moving all the notes back and forth, but I could go into specific notes and move just them. So let's move this one a lot back and this one just a bit back. And you'll notice now I've got 2 little markers here to show me the other notes. Let's move another octave, move this one just a bit back, and then move this forward and this forward, and this even more forward. So now hopefully I'll get an awkward strum. If you hold the step, you'll be able to move all these notes together in time. So if I wanted the strum to start right on the beat, I could do that. You've got the usual ratchet options and also the same trig conditions, so I could choose to have the probability of a step triggering reduced on a per step basis if I wanted to lock it, or for all the steps in the pattern. Just by turning this down, we've got the same trig conditions, so a step can be either part of a fill or not, activate based on a previous condition or a neighboring track, on the first loop of a pattern or last loop, or on loop so-and-so every number of loops. Fills, by the way, can now be either momentary or latching. And I really like the sequencing lane option. So by default, you're sequencing both notes and p-locks simultaneously on the trig buttons. So say if I wanted to automate ascend, so say I could add notes to the pattern like this, and also automate, say, ascend like this. Let's add it here as well. And when I remove notes, then it will also take away the automation. Now we can go ahead and sequence either notes or p-locks. So say if I go ahead and sequence just the p-locks, then I'll see a hint of a step with a note here, but I can't delete the note, which is good. The note is protected. I could always add automation like this and add automation to that step, but I can't erase the note. Similarly, if I go to sequence notes, I'll see hints of automation, but no matter what I do, I can't erase them. So that's a good thing in my book, but if you like it the old way, you can go back. A quick tip here, if you hold a step, you'll see all the automation on that page, but if I move to a different page and hold that step, you'll see a hint that something's being automated on other pages as well. So I could say add automation here as well, then go to this page. When I hold this step, you'll notice these 2 light up to indicate that there's automation on these pages as well. Next up with sequencing, transform is a fun one. So let's say that I've got this pattern. I can hit transform and quickly have a ramp up or a ramp down or randomize velocity in this case. So that's transformation of velocities. You can also randomize placement, which won't do much if all the notes are on. But let's say this is my pattern. I can now randomize the placement. Let's move on and talk about a few performance aspects of Tonverk. You've got mutes, which work both for subtracks and main tracks. So say within this subtrack, I can unmute the snares here or the hi-hats, add my bass, add my arps, add to this stab of arps every now and then. This is randomized, so it may or may not show up. There it is. Or just mute it out. Another fun performance option is the transpose function. So choose the track you want to transpose, and that's more appropriate for melodic tracks, obviously. Hit transpose, and then you can go up or down. You can't transpose all the melodic tracks at once. So say if I've got a bass pattern going here, I can transpose it quickly and the arps quickly. go down with both. They should add a feature where you can hold multiple tracks and transpose them at once. And if you do have transpose going on, then when you exit transpose mode, the minus or plus will still be blue to show you that transpose is active. Like other Elektron devices, this supports pattern chaining and songs. So pattern chaining is the temporary chaining of patterns. You just hold pattern, choose a pattern, and then add patterns to the chain. You can repeat patterns and go on and on. But this is all temporary. Once you choose a different pattern, the chain is gone, unlike songs, which are pattern chains you can save. I won't go into this in detail, but you use this menu to add new patterns to the song. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can have patterns loop a few times and set a row length and tempo. Let's move on to other performance aspects of Tonverk. There are two methods for risk-free experimentation. If you hit function and memorize, you can start changing whatever you want. Let's say this. And if you've gone too far, function recall will bring the pattern back again. You can also do that with the perform function. The perform function, though, is a mode. Any changes you make will always be temporary and will revert once you exit the mode. Whereas I can use memorize to sort of start experimenting. Memorize. And if I like the pattern that way, I can just move to other patterns. Then when I save the project, all my changes will be saved along with it. You just need to remember both memorize and recall and perform work for only one pattern at a time. Let's explore things a bit further. I love the arpeggiator here. You can activate offset patterns for it, which is what I'm doing here. So you've got the normal arpeggiator stuff if you just add no offsets with octaves. And different modes like up and down. Cycle, which is up down. But the sequencer is where things get interesting. And the sequence can go up to 16 steps long. Then there's also a chord mode, so you can press one note and get one of many chords. And this can be in multiple scales. And you'll see the notes of the scale highlighted here and on the keyboard, by the way, if you have the light guides going. And you can also force notes into the scale if you want. So in snap mode, no matter what you play, it'll be in scale. And in filter mode, it won't let you play notes that aren't in the scale. Before we head out to the pros and cons, a quick look at the settings. Not all of these settings apply to all the track types, but you can make tracks monophonic if you insist. And there are legato modes. There's great portamento here, a bunch of expressive mod sources, each of which can point to up to 4 destinations, which is pretty nice. Other noteworthy settings are the order of the drive and the filter, velocity to volume curves, which is important for multi-samples of velocity-sensitive instruments, envelope types, a couple of those. We've already seen the effects, and there's a handy diagram of modulation options. Okay, let's talk about pros and cons for Tonverk, and we can look at this either in reference to the universe of available music-making instruments or just in comparison to Elektron gear. So first, the universe. We have so many music-making options these days. Setting aside price for just a bit, typically the more powerful and feature-rich an environment is, the less hands-on it is. At one end of the spectrum is a DAW like Ableton Live, which can do pretty much everything. But if you're watching a video about hardware, you might consider this a negative. It's very open, unlimited, with a lot of options, and for the most part, you've got to control it all with a mouse. Now, you can pair DAWs with controllers to get slightly more hands-on, but you're still going to be using a mouse a lot and staring at a lot of menus, features, and windows. Then you've got platforms like MPC and Maschine, which are very close in features to DAWs, but they're designed to let you do pretty much everything without ever touching a mouse. Though you could argue that MPC's touchscreen is a similar experience to using a mouse. And then there are a bunch of other groovebox options by Elektron and others at various price points, each of which focus on a curated subset of features you might find on a DAW. These excel at giving you immediate access to what they do offer. So in comparison to the options on the right, if you're working with a feature checklist, it's very easy to find cons. Tonverk doesn't support plugins, it doesn't have a per-track clip-launching grid, it's got only one arpeggiator and one chord option, it's only sample-based as opposed to other forms of synthesis. Though with multisampling, filtering, and effects, it's arguable that you can make it sound like anything. Anyway, where Tonverk and most Elektron gear do shine is in giving you immediate hands-on access to the elements that it does have. So you want an arpeggiator, it's right here. You want chords, they're here. Patterns, filters, amp envelopes, effects, modulation, fills, you get it. They're all there in the same place, and for the most part, one or two or sometimes more clicks away. Now there's a lot to learn here and quite a few shortcuts to memorize if you really want to get good at it. But once you do, this is a fast and rewarding experience. And if you love to experiment with sounds, modulation, and automation with a hardware-first approach, the Elektron sequencer is the best game in town. Then compared to other Elektron instruments on the pros side, there are quite a few firsts here. We finally get polyphonic sampler-based tracks. The subtracks dramatically increase the track count without much downside, and the multisampler dramatically increases the tonal palette of this device. And you can go wild with these with the 4 gigs of RAM. Also pro for Tonverk compared to other Elektron machines is the number of effects, some of which, as I showed you earlier, can be really surprising. And the effects routing options with 4 insert buses, 3 sends, all configurable, all sequenceable, along with the ability to integrate external effects, means there's a lot to explore on the effects side. On the I/O side, 2 inputs is a bit limiting, but USB-C audio does give us more options with USB host devices, meaning computers and phones. Besides that, the onboard keyboard makes sequencing a lot easier, especially when sequencing polyphonic content. That said, on the cons side, certainly compared to Elektron devices, there are no synth engines here. And on the sample side, the current selection of machines doesn't include sample-based instruments we're used to on other Elektron samplers, so at least as of this firmware, there's no time stretching or repitching, no slice or grid machines, and no live looping option. One would hope we'll see these as firmware updates because this tech exists on other Elektron machines, but obviously that's not guaranteed at this time. Finally, on the hardware side, the keyboard buttons are not velocity sensitive. There's no built-in microphone for sampling, no internal battery, and the screen relative to Maschine or MPC is small and low resolution. On my feature wishlist side are a whole bunch of things. I'll show them on screen. I won't read them all out to you. But probably top on my list is the ability to trim and edit multisamples. Right now, if anything goes wrong on the auto sampling side as it goes through potentially hundreds of samples, for example, unexpected latency or a click or something in one sample, which happened to me as I was exploring this, there's no way to trim individual multisamples or edit ranges to address these issues. It would also be great if audio interfaces were supported over USB, so we could expand this with more than just the 2 inputs. Then a final little tip, until if and when Elektron adds a slicing machine here, since it's so easy to auto-sample using a computer and USB cable, you can use your DAW's auto slicer with grid cycling or threshold detection to create slices on your computer, and then simply auto-sample the note range every semitone that plays back those slices. Anyway, that's it for Tonverk, a new member in the Elektron family with plenty of firsts. Stay tuned for me playing you all the factory presets, and I'll upload a high-quality version of that audio to my Patreon, where you'll also find my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.